Jim Kalbach is back here with us to talk some more about mapping experiences from those insights that you get all the way to the actions that you can take. A little bit about Jim. He's a noted author, speaker, and instructor in design, customer experience, strategy, the works. He's currently chief evangelist at Mural. Jim, I just love that title. That's so cool. And many of you probably know Mural as that leading online whiteboard solution that we all cannot live without, or many of us can. I know I can't. So Jim, what do you got for us?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thanks for that, Katie. Great to be back here at Amuse. I learned that I was the last speaker at the last event that was in person in Budapest. I wish I could be there again. But as Katie said, my name is Jim Kalbach. I'm the author of 3 books. Designing Web Navigation kind of reflects my background in design, information architecture, and UX. And then in 2016, I wrote the book Mapping Experiences, and more recently, Jobs to be Done. But it's that mapping experiences that I wanted to pick up on, because we have the second edition. The second edition of Mapping Experiences came out in 2020. Lots of new case studies and lots of new examples in there as well. You can also head over to the Jobs to be Done toolkit if you want to learn more about Jobs to be Done. We got a ton of online resources there. But let's jump into mapping experiences and talk about that a little bit. What I want to do is just briefly set up mapping in and of itself. But what I want to focus on is making that actionable and the activities that you can do around mapping experiences. I'd like to begin my description of mapping experiences with this quote from Steve Jobs in 1997. He returned to Apple after having been asked to leave the company that he founded to save the company, more or less. And in an all-hands meeting in front of the entire company, he responded to a question from the audience with this statement: "You've got to start with the customer experience and work back toward the technology, not the other way around." And I think with this, he gave a little bit of insight into what he had planned for the company in 1997. Namely, he was going to reverse the equation of software development and marketing, and actually just business in general. Start with the experience, work back towards the technology. And I think this gave a little bit of insight into his approach to saving Apple. But it also, for me, it's also an articulation point. If you look at the date there around 1997, we kind of got the word that customer experience was a thing and people should pay attention to it. And Steve Jobs kind of showed us the way. But it really begs the question. It really now begs the question, what is an experience? A lot of us have the word business, the word experience on our business cards or in our job title. I know I used to have that word in my job title. But it kind of defies definition. It's a hard word to define if you really think about it. What is an experience? And I often, when I ask this question in workshops, for instance, I often get lots of things back, around the emotions that someone feels while they're performing an action. Sometimes people talk about a product experience, and those are all right. But there's not one kind of clear definition of the word experience. The best one that I know of is stuff that happens to humans, stuff that happens to people. And I don't mean that facetiously. That's actually a really good definition. It's all kind of all encompassing, maybe not specific enough. So I often then follow that up with all of the actions, thoughts, and feelings that an individual has when they're interacting with a product or service over time. That's kind of my textbook definition of the word experience, but it has a lot of problems. Point is, it's not easy to just kind of walk into a room full of people, let's say your product team, and say, we're going to create a great experience, if everybody has a different mental model of what the experience is supposed to be, and they can't even define that term. So if our new imperative, as Steve Jobs pointed out, is to start with the customer experience and work back towards the technology, we need a way to talk about experience. We need a way to talk about stuff that happens to humans. And the way that we do that, by and large, there's other approaches, but one of the key approaches that the creative fields and design and innovation has adopted is creating a map. You create a diagram of the experience. You visualize the experience, because you take all that fuzziness that we're not able to kind of say in words and you visualize it. And that's super important to be able to do that. This is an example of an experience map. In this case, it's for a patient going to a doctor, an ophthalmologist, an eye doctor in particular. The top part of the diagram is a snapshot of the patient's experience. So we always start with the customer, right? And you can see there's a couple of different facets of information here, the thoughts, the feelings, and that's those wavy lines are the kind of the feelings. And then there's some steps and actions there. So there's a chronology here, but that top part is really just a very, very brief snapshot of the experience. What you see below then are all the things that a doctor's office do, and the multiple actors in a doctor's office, like the receptionist, the technician, the doctor, and so forth, what they have to do in order to provide that experience. So what you're trying to do in this diagram is start with the experience at the top and understand that it's highly reduced, but that's okay, because that allows you to then align or compare your offering to it. And by visualizing it, you can have a conversation with your team around it. Now we can make a conversation around experience more tangible. And that's really what this class of diagrams does. And that's what I talk about in the book. I don't talk about just experience maps or just customer journey maps or service blueprints. There's actually lots of artifacts and approaches and methods that fit my definition of experience mapping. I think about it as all of them. And what you're fundamentally trying to do is align the experience with the offering that you have and how you're going to support that or create that experience, right? And I kind of hinted at the importance of visualization. I just want to highlight that even more. By visualizing it, you can get agreement, right? Because I could go out and do research. By the way, experience maps are based on research, right? I can do that research and write a 15-page report and say, here's the summary of the experience that I observed in words, right? But we know people don't read reports. And even if they could read the report, they're not going to connect what's on page 12 with what was on page 3. But by visualizing things, you get this compelling artifact that is concise and shows relationships in a new way. And that allows us to negotiate reality, as I call it. And this is a diagram from Jeff Patton's book, User Story Mapping, which I would say is a type of experience map. User Story Mapping by Jeff Patton. I recommend you go check that out. He's got this little cartoon in there, which really goes to the heart of why visualizing your work is really important. I'm glad we all agree. And I think we've all been on teams before where we have a mental model of what it is we're trying to do, what's our goal. But if you look at this cartoon here, there's different mental models, right? And blue circle, or blue square, red circle, yellow triangle. And then they put it out, the team in this scenario, they put it out on a blackboard. And they say, oh, we're not aligned. By putting it out, you can then have this conversation and negotiate reality, as I say, so that you're in more agreement, right? And that's really one of the key functions of mapping, is to get agreement across your team. So here's my general process for mapping experiences, right? And again, this applies to different types of maps that you might create. You need to initiate it, make it relevant to the questions that your team and your business has, your organization has. What are the organizational questions you're trying to answer with a map? Investigation, it's based on research, needs to be real and valid. Then you create that diagram, right? The visualization. And you might call it, different names. It might be a customer journey map, experience map, service blueprint. I get into the differences in my book, but for this talk, I'm just thinking about all of them under this class of mapping experiences. But then that last phase there, I want to really focus on that. You need to make it actionable. You need to align and envision a better future or innovation or an improvement to your offering, right? And it's really that last phase that I think is kind of critical. When I wrote the book Mapping Experiences in 2016, people were kind of raising their hand and saying, what's a customer journey map and how do I create one? The question that I'm getting now is, I now know what an experience map is and a customer journey map. And I'm kind of assuming most people listening to me right now know what a customer journey map is, has at least heard the term, if not created one themselves. And that's kind of where we are, I think, in terms of mapping experiences. But the big question is, how do I make that actionable, right? Because the mapping process helps you align the outside to the inside. Start with the customer, work back towards the technology, right? You get that outside in alignment. But you also have to do what I call an inside across alignment. You have to align the hearts and minds of your team to understand, to create a mental model of what the experience is. Again, if that's our imperative now, we need a tangible way to get aligned around experience, right? And that's what the diagram does, the map does, as we saw in that previous cartoon. So I really want to, I don't want to focus on creating how to create a diagram. I want to focus on that last phase, what I call align and envision. See the word envision out there. And really about making it actionable. How do you take the research and the diagram and how do you activate that inside of your team? Thing is, diagrams are compelling documents that invite engagement by others. And I mentioned this already, that if you did research and wrote a 15-page summary of that research in words, it's not going to have the same compelling kind of attraction that a diagram has. And I've seen people look at a diagram and walk over to it and say, tell me more. You don't get that with a 15-page report usually, right? So it invites engagement. And I think it's up to you, the map maker, and I'm speaking to everyone as if they're map makers here, to kind of switch your hats. So you got to do the diagram and it has to be valid and based on research. But now you have to switch your hat and become a facilitator, because you have to take advantage of that engagement that you can get from the visualization. And that's really what I want to talk about then, how you switch from map making to facilitation here. And some of these photos here are from workshops that I've run in the past, but the point that I wanted to make with them is kind of the engagement and the interaction that these artifacts provide, right? Here in the physical world, and we'll talk a little bit about remote situations. These are from the kind of the physical world, but you can actually have people walk over to it with a pen and contribute to it, or stand up and point to things, or run exercises around these dot voting assessments and things like that. We'll talk about that in a second as well too. But it's really about getting people mobilized, right? You want a map of the experience to be a lean forward experience, not a lean back, right? Bullet points in PowerPoint, reports of 15-page reports are lean back documents, right? People can fold their arms and say, oh, Jim did the research, he must know the answers. No, the answers come from the conversations that you have around the maps. So one aspect of mapping that I bake into my process is a workshop. It's kind of a centerpiece of the research, right? So you're gonna understand the experience and go out and observe it and create this diagram. Have some activity planned, whether it's 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, where you bring a diverse group of people together and you workshop it, right? And here's the shape of the workshop in chapter 8 of the new edition. Maybe it's chapter 9. I changed the chapters a little bit, but both chapters 8 and chapters 9 talk about the idea of making things actionable, particularly through a workshop. And this is the shape that I see for the workshop. First, you want to empathize. First, you just want to understand the experience in and of itself. Don't try to come up with solutions too quickly. Just empathize with that experience and the actors in that experience, right? And then you want to diverge, envision possible ways to address the pain points, to fill the gaps that you notice there in kind of the second part of the workshop. And then you want to evaluate those concepts and the ideas that you've just envisioned. But you're not done at the end. After the workshop, you need to continue the momentum with what I call experiments. So empathize, envision, evaluate, and plan experiments. That gives a shape to the workshop and kind of the arc that you want to plan as now the facilitator of this workshop. Here's just an example of how you can engage people. I like to do this exercise called grade your performance. So the first thing I'll do is have people read through the diagram that I create and just empathize with the individual, with the key actor that's represented in that experience that you just represented. And then think about your own service or your own offering, or even a competitor, but I usually start with your own offering, and give yourself a school grade. In this case, I was working in Germany, and 1 was the best grade and 6 was the worst grade. And I did this in breakout groups. And you can see from these photos that for each phase in my chronology, one breakout group failed us, basically said our product fails the individual at this point, and another one gave it, a middle grade there. So right there, you have a conversation. What did the group on the left know that the group on the right didn't know? And if you have a mix of people, marketing, customer success, even salespeople, I've done it with, but engineers, everybody from product that you want there, and business decision makers, you get that cross-pollination of insights. Turns out in this case, that group did know something that the other teams didn't know. So now you're having this rich conversation about what really is the problem with our experience, right? You're uncovering that as the facilitator, using the map as the platform to do that. Here's another example of a workshop that I conducted or co-facilitated with my colleague, Eric Flowers, using his technique for service blueprinting. It's a type of a map. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But the point I want to make with this is you can see the map in the background, right? That's all those colored sticky notes with the kind of towers or inverted towers, these columns of different lengths, and there's different color coding on there. But what that gave rise to was this conversation. And you can see the handwriting on top of this, right? The circles and the arrows. And then we even put a screenshot in there. And you notice kind of in the center of the screen here, it says back and forth experience, right? There's a layer of conversation on top of this diagram that doesn't come from the diagram itself, right? The diagram itself is not going to give you the answers. It's the conversation on top of it that's important. What are we doing good? What are we doing bad? Where are competitors doing? What's the key pain point? What's the key moment that we need to address here? And the key pain point around that if we just solve that one thing, the experience will be exponentially better. You want to find those trigger moments, right? And that's what there's a star in the middle of there. I'm not sure if you can see it there, but we kind of came to that conclusion and we did it together. It was a group of mixed people, talked about this experience, and then had this conversation, which comes out on top of the map. So I don't like to make my maps look too polished, because I want to invite people to participate in the diagramming and particularly in that conversation on top. That's how you get the action. Right? That's how you get the alignment of the hearts and minds, right? And here's a photo from the session of the diagram that I just showed you. So you can see up there on the Microsoft Surface Hub, there's Eric facilitating there. We're creating the map, right? And then on the left, there's folks in the room with laptops, but there's also a screen there. We were actually dialed into folks in the Philippines. It was their support center in the Philippines. The point here that I wanted to make is, particularly in a pandemic and post-pandemic world, you can do all of these workshops and these activities digitally, and you can do them with remote groups and even hybrid teams as well too, right? So think about what I'm saying about facilitating towards a specific outcome. How might you do that remotely? How might you do that in hybrid teams as well too? Just wanted to kind of throw that in there. So here are some activities. I already talked about number one, because I get the question then, well, what can I actually do with the diagram? Assessment and evaluation. I just gave an example of that, where you give yourself a school grade, right? And evaluate. You can evaluate your own service. You can evaluate competitors. You can evaluate even just what are the human pain points in there, right? Some kind of evaluation of, once you have things laid out visually, you can then start to assess it and have this rich conversation from a very customer-centric standpoint, right? Start with the experience, work back towards the technology. If you put a map up on the wall or up on a screen, and that's your starting point, you're going to be starting with the experience and working back towards the technology. You can also do some kinds of prioritization, right? There's lots of pain points. There's lots of business opportunities. There's lots of ways to serve your customers better. Let's prioritize those. Right? Because very often, here's what I find, sometimes requirements and product roadmaps are based on pain points, but are they the most important pain points? Right? Because you can say, oh, our customers have a pain point at the beginning of their experience, and that's true, but there's a bigger pain point elsewhere. So by doing it as a diagram, you're actually able to see things in relation to one another and prioritize against each other and say, well, yeah, that was a problem over there, but there's a bigger problem over there. And if you solve a bigger problem for your customers, by the way, you typically have a bigger business opportunity, right? That's more value back, right? So you want to create value. You want to see where the value exchange is the most impactful. One thing that I like to do is fill in the blanks. So like I just mentioned, I like to not have my diagrams be too polished. In fact, sometimes I leave a blank row when I enter this workshop. Remember, we're talking about a workshop here. And I give people a pen or digital sticky notes, and I say, you fill it in, right? I've done my research, but I need to know from you what are the business imperatives or the technologies involved from our side as well too. So I invite participation in the mapping as well too. You can do a SWOT analysis. What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? You can even role play and do deep dives. And there's more. Actually, I have up on the right side of the screen here, the book Game Storming. It's really kind of a catalog of exercises and activities that you can do in these workshops. Some of them directly related to mapping, but some of them aren't, right? So the map is really just the platform, the springboard into conversations, which are, how do we understand experience and what are we going to do about it, right? Start with the experience, work back towards the technology. And that's what a lot of these methods in game storming do. So if you don't have game storming, I recommend that book too. And here's what it might look like, right? So you come up with concepts. So now I'm going into that third phase where you first empathize, then you envision, but now you want to evaluate your own concepts and your own spots in the experience that you're going to address. What are some concrete ideas? What are things that you're going to do? But you want to evaluate those, and it really helps to start articulating the ideas, right? It might not be a full-blown prototype or anything like that, but you can create storyboards of them, right? You can prioritize things on a 2x2 matrix, which is what's shown on the left side there as well too. So you don't just want to come up with ideas, you want to try to articulate them as much as possible, and then even evaluate your own concepts as well too. And one thing that I find is in this type of work, and this type of workshop resembles kind of a design sprint. If you're from design thinking, you're like, hey, how is this different from a design thinking workshop? I mean, it brings all of those elements together, right? The difference is you're using the map as the conversation piece. But on top of that, yeah, absolutely, design thinking type activities, diverge and converge. But you don't want to end with just a wall full of sticky notes. You also want to test your ideas. You want to see how far you can get to articulate them as a group, and then even test them. And that's what I've done in these workshops. And you can see here on the right side, we actually created very, very quickly in a tool like Envision, we created a prototype of an idea. So we went from a sticky note to, it's only 3 pages or so in this prototype, but you're able to do that really, really quickly. And that gives you insight, but then you can also test it with external people. And that's what I'm showing here on the right side of the screen. This is in a workshop. As part of the workshop, we actually had set up usability tests at the end of the second day, where we brought people in, customers in, and we showed them our concepts right away. So that's actually part of the workshop. Again, kind of like a design sprint, if you know design sprints. But here's the thing, and I just kind of mentioned this, ideas are overrated. If your goal is to generate more and more ideas, you're probably not going to get that far. And here's why. The volume of ideas is rarely a problem that an organization has. And just, think about that yourself. Is the lack of ideas the problem that your organization has right now? My experience is that organizations are swimming in ideas. They have a ton of great ideas. It's making them actionable. That's the challenge. So you need to change from a map maker to a facilitator, but it's not just facilitating that workshop. It's also facilitating the follow through, right? This photo is actually the end of a workshop that I did. We generated, 100 sticky notes. That's so easy to do. And there's no value in a sticky note. A sticky note with an idea doesn't have any business value. You got to put some teeth on that. Articulate the ideas, test the ideas, come up with experiments. That's the last phase. Come up with experiments to prove out the business viability of these ideas. And here's why, because if you go over to your manager or CEO, business decision maker in your organization with a sticky note, there's not going to be enough information there for them to place a bet, to fund or give resources towards that idea, because it's hard, even for them, just because they're managers, they can't recognize innovation in advance better than you can. It's hard to recognize an innovation as such just from a few words on a sticky note. This photo here is actually the prototype for the first computer mouse. I believe that's Doug Engelbart's hand there over at Xerox PARC in California back in like 1968 or something like that, when they started playing around with graphic user interfaces. at the time, user interfaces was command line. That's how you interacted with a computer, was command line. And imagine you're the director of Xerox PARC and Doug Engelbart comes in with this and says, no, really, this is going to change computing for everybody, because this is what allows the graphical user interface, which has a completely different learning curve and usability experience around it. And you need to invest in this mouse. Looks like a hunk of wood with wire coming out of it. I don't recognize that as a game-changing innovation in this stage. You got to go further than that to be able to recognize innovations as such. And that's what your business stakeholders want, right? So I love this from the book, The Innovator's Hypothesis by Michael Schrage. He talks about business value experiments using what he calls the 5x5 framework. Can you get 5 people together and in 5 days come up with 5 experiments? That's what I'm suggesting with the mapping workshop, right? So those first 3 steps are kind of inherent in the workshop that I just discussed. But he goes on and says they get $5,000 and they get 5 weeks of resource time to prove out those experiments, right? And it's those last 2 points that are really about the follow through. Again, I've done lots of workshops where you end with a wall full of sticky notes. You take a picture of it, send it off to the stakeholder and say, here, we've solved your business problem. The business decision maker says there's not enough here for me to go on, right? It's the proving out and it's the follow through. So here's the real challenge. Can you get commitment from that business decision maker to fund and give resources towards the ideas that come out of your workshop? That's really hard to do. But it's really about an innovation motion that you need to set up as the facilitator and to follow through as much as possible. Are we mapping experiences now? I don't know. We might be into like lean. And again, you're going to recognize other techniques here, like lean experimentation. But I would urge you to follow through. That's really where things break down. So you want to go from insight as far into action as you can. So thanks so much for your attention and time. You can contact me. There's my email address. Find me on LinkedIn. I like connecting to people on LinkedIn, but also check out the Jobs to be Done toolkit if you're interested in Jobs to be Done. Hey, Katie.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome back, folks, to my screen. Thanks so much for that, Jim. I kind of had a fangirl moment there because I've been hearing so much about this Jobs to be Done book, and I was like, oh, it's the guy. So super fun. That's exactly what I'm going to be doing later this afternoon, is picking up a copy of that. But no, I really enjoyed this. In particular, I liked the idea of working, taking that workshop from a little bit further from just, a lot of times people stop at like that strategy or that story, but actually being able to make it actionable and doing so as a group to build up that follow through, to make sure the thing happens. A lot of times you workshop with folks that have, the idea people and you have the more tactical people. And, a lot of times I've seen the idea people be like, here's this awesome thing. Figure out how to do it. So that brings everybody on the same page there.
Right. But you know what happens to the
satisfying.
You know what happens to the tactical people 3 months or 6 months down the road? They're scratching their head and going, why are we doing this? Right. If you bring that all together, they have that shared reference so that they know in the middle of the project exactly why they're doing it, because they helped create that idea with you.
Absolutely. Everybody's got that piece of ownership in it.
Totally.
Great stuff. Speaking to our audience, pop me some Q&A questions in there. I know there was a lot of really juicy tidbits in Jim's talk that we just heard. Before I start with a couple of questions, I do want to mention you can pop over that polls tab. Let us know how helpful this topic was to you. We want to make sure these things are resonating with our audience and helping you with your everyday jobs. So let us know what you think. Jim, let's talk. Really enjoyed that, just talked about how I enjoyed that focus on getting actionable as a group. Where can I learn if I was someone who went back from this conference and wanted to be able to make this actionable for my team? Where can I go to learn more about facilitation to be able to best run some of those exercises with my team?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I did mention the book Game Storming, which is kind of a catalog of individual exercises and how to run them, how long it takes, and what the mechanics of each of those are. But the intro chapters of Game Storming are actually a great piece on facilitation and workshop arcs And I was actually influenced by that. My little, the 3 E's that I have, and then the fourth one, experimentation, was actually influenced by them, because they talk about crafting this arc that you can think about facilitation almost like experience design, right? The medium is different. It's people and it's time and it's, tools and things that you're going to use. But you got to think about how you're going to start from something like a map and get to agreement at the end of it. And that's a great book to start. But there are other books on facilitation out there as well, too. And more these days, there's more and more facilitation books out there, even courses on it. And I know Linda Schwartz, even at, I forget what university she's at, I think somewhere in California, is starting to teach this to MBAs, because I think facilitation is a future skill that every leader or every team lead is going to have as well, too. The other thing, too, is I co-authored this book over here at Mural, Facilitating Remote Workshops.
That book, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. This is a free PDF. I have the printed version of it because we print ebooks here at Mural. It makes a nice swag gift. But it focuses on the remote condition, but there's a lot of just facilitation in here. How do you get people engaged? What can you do with time boxing and your tools of facilitation? The other person I would recommend that you follow is Daniel Stillman. Go over and check out Daniel Stillman. He's got this thing called the Conversation Factory. Nice website, resource. He does podcasts, newsletter, and he just wrote a book around conversation design. And that's what he calls it. It's a little bit bigger than facilitation, actually, but it's, basically an organization is a series of conversations. And you need to think about the types of conversations you're having, with whom, when, for what purpose, and design those conversations.
Totally. Oh my gosh, so much the facilitation being part of designing the experience around that as well. It's almost kind of meta. You're like designing an experience and then designing an experience around designing an experience.
Right, exactly.
No, I remember when I started, with some of my first workshops that I facilitated, I was blown away by how much prep work, and how much is on your shoulders as that facilitator to carry that conversation, encourage, people to speak up and all those great ideas flowing and whatnot. There's so much more to it than just being like, here's a whiteboard, go sticky note.
But I think designers actually have the right skills, right? Because if you approach it like a design problem, you can apply your design thinking and your UX skills to facilitation. And that's why a lot of designers facilitate. One more quick reference, Doug Ferguson over at Voltage Control. Check out Voltage Control and what they're doing over there. Really great facilitation offering that they have. They do consultancy, but they also have a lot of education. You can actually take a facilitation masterclass over at Voltage Control with Doug Ferguson. Highly recommended.
This is fantastic. You are full of great resources here. This is a little unconventional, but if you happen to be able to stick around a little, it'd be great if you could pop over the chat and share some for anybody who wasn't able to capture some of those down, because again, wealth of knowledge here. Fantastic. We have a question that popped up in the chat. In this instance, we ended up many times with walls full of sticky notes after a workshop. What would be the first step that they should hit, like someone in this situation should take after that workshop to kind of keep up that momentum and remember, everything that came out of it?
Well, first of all, prioritize that you want to come out of that workshop with what are your top 3 concepts that you're going to move forward. And you can do group prioritization. But one thing that I like to do in those workshops is bring a decision maker in, right? And it's kind of arbitrary, and it might even seem counterintuitive to what I've been talking about. But sometimes they're like all good ideas. And you can just punt over to the decision maker. And I know the design sprint community also talks about bringing a decision maker in as well, too. But you basically want to get agreement and buy-in from the person who's going to fund the experiments that those are the top 3. So don't leave with a wall. You'll have that wall for reference, but you want to leave with 3 things or 6 things or something like that, a smaller set of things, right? The other thing that you can do is bring a project manager with you and actually take the experiments that you're going to run, right? We believe if we create this thing that's on the sticky note, we're going to see a reduction in calls to the call center, by 50%, or, whatever your little hypothesis is. Get that hypothesis out and give it to a project manager who's right there in the workshop, and come up with a calendar. And guess what? The week after your workshop and the week after that and after that, there's going to be phone calls that the project manager runs as well, too.
I love it. Yeah, we've done something similar. Exactly what you said is you're going to get so much out of those exercises if you can come away with, instead of an empathy map full of sticky notes, hundreds, like you said, instead you can boil that down to just, a couple that summarize. You don't have to keep going back and referencing it again. So I like that, carrying that forward.
Yep.
Excellent. So let's flip back to being that facilitator. I'm sure you've had plenty of situations where you've had either stakeholders or participants who may not be so willing to participate. Yeah. So what do you do when you have something like that? Because that can really kind of harsh the mellow, I guess. Is that the phrase?
That fold the arms and lean back person and kind of trying to derail. You got to be careful because they can derail the whole thing, right? If they form this little counter movement to what you're trying to do, then it could get other people sucked in there. One thing that I personally do is I ignore them. I think about it like I love that. Yeah, like a rock in the stream, and everybody else is the stream, and guess what? They're just going to go around that rock, and they might even cover the rock over. So I pretty much ignore them. I also I try to bring a lot of energy in, right? So that my energy overpowers their resistance and that kind of thing. But practically speaking, I think structuring activities using guided methods is super important. That's why things like the activities in the book Gamestorming are so important. You don't want to go in with a blank whiteboard and say, okay, guys, let's now brainstorm. You can break things down into small steps. Everybody put your top 3 pain points out, right? And you got 2 minutes to do it. So think about what I just said. Everybody put your top 3 pain points out. I said 3. I want 3 pain points from everybody, and you got 2 minutes to do it, right? So by structuring each step of the workshop in that way, there won't be an opportunity for that naysayer, for that derailer to actually interject, because your agenda, your flow of the workshop actually takes everybody with them along, right? You've time boxed everything. All the steps are worked out. You can stop and say, hey, does anybody have any questions? But that's when I ignore the naysayers. when you have those discussions, just have, oh, okay, great point. Anybody else? That kind of thing as well too. But that's part of kind of the art of facilitation. It does take a little bit of feel to be able to control the room.
Absolutely. And I can totally see how, if you're practicing facilitation, you're able to really put a lot of emphasis on everyone giving in their own opinions, and everybody's got a helpful perspective. How if you're not participating, your opinion is going to be left in, in the dust.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm sure that goes a long way as well.
Totally.
Okay, let's see here. I think we got time for maybe one more question.
Okay.
How do you run mapping workshops when you have remote groups spread around the world? This is an opportune time to plug Mural. I know I'm setting you up for that.
Well, one of the attractive things for me to come to Mural as a company was because it was a visual tool, right? That diagram that I showed in my presentation about visualizing work, it's not just diagrams. You can visualize all kinds of work using Mural. But it does become the perfect tool, I think, for a mapping workshop, right? Because you can do this remotely. Again, I think you got to use your designer mindset and think about what are the outcomes that you want. Think about the shape of the interaction, empathize, envision, evaluate, and then experiment. And how are you going to, given the tools that you have and the constraints that you have, how are you going to design that experience, right? And some things that I find happen are, you're probably going to shy away from one big 8-hour workshop and break things up into smaller chunks. You're probably also going to think about what can you do asynchronously. So how can I prep people and get input from them before we even start? One thing I like to do is a survey, right? Do a survey of everybody who's coming to your workshop, which I recommend, by the way, about 12 people. I've done up to 20 people. That's a little harder to do, but usually about 12 people, and try to get as many perspectives as possible. I have been in several situations where I was the catalyst for bringing the marketing people and the engineers, let's say, together for the first time, right? Was in my workshop. They don't know each other in organizations. So use that as an opportunity to bring people together. You got about 12 people, send out a survey and collect answers on some things that you can then come into the workshop and already have input that you're starting from. So you kind of use your time very efficiently by doing asynchronous work and things like that. Again, if you just, use your design thinking mindset, you can design that experience instead of just one 8-hour workshop where we all fly together and, do everything from beginning to end in one shot, how would I break that up in different modes of interaction? One thing that you just touched on, Katie, just a super practical tip to end here, do individual work. And by that, I mean, give people time where they have 2 minutes or 5 minutes to just put their own ideas out, right? On a mural canvas, everybody gets a spot, you claim your name there, and then you can react to that individually. And just having that heads down time does a lot of things. First of all, it allows people to think, and you're not just listening to other people. But the other thing is it allows everybody to contribute, even the folks from the quote unquote back of the room. Now you can see it all. So you can actually, I think there are advantages to working remotely in terms of inclusion, in terms of diversity of perspective that you can actually bring there. And those individual head down activities are really key, I think, to bring into your facilitation.
Absolutely. I thought of the inclusion aspect too, because you can, maybe location being international, being different cross-discipline, you can make sure the people that you really need in the room are there.
Yeah.
So excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jim. This was just really exciting.